My name is Tim Carone. I'm a professor in the Mendoza College of Business. I'm in a new department, the Department of IT Analytics and Operations. So we teach a lot of analytics and technology. I teach courses in, we have a program called the Masters in Business Analytics. It's a year-long program. It's a brand new one. We're in our third year. It's a one-year-long program where people who've been in the business world working for a few years or many years spend a year in our downtown Chicago office. I don't know if you know, but we own the building across the street from the Art Institute, the old Santa Fe building. And we have a couple different programs in there, including our business analytics program. So we're very excited about that. I also teach machine learning. That's the new word for artificial intelligence. And an emerging issues class on technology as well. So, by way of background, I actually started off work as a rocket scientist. I have my PhDs in astrophysics. And after one too many years at Berkeley, I decided I didn't like California. Neither did my wife, who's from Chicago. So I went into consulting world because in 1985, I started using this thing called the internet. And by 1995, I had about 10 years experience when this new thing called e-commerce came about. So at the time, Anderson consulted and offered me a lot more money than Berkeley was paying me. So I spent the last 20-some years in consulting, putting in, doing business strategy, IT work. So anyway, one of the things I talk about is driverless cars or self-driving cars. It's one of the things I'm really interested in, and I've spent a lot of time thinking about actually doing research, innovation work at companies. Every company I've been with, I always started off an innovation practice to think about stuff, and this is one of them. So just by show of hands, how many of you are in the automobile business, whether dealerships, supply chains, tier 1 suppliers? Okay, a few. So what this talk is sort of about the automotive industry, but it's also about your future, as I see it. Okay, I'll predicate with Carone's vision. And the idea is that, but kind of by way of context, one of the things that I believe, and many others believe too, is we are at the beginning of a new industrial revolution. Meaning, the first one was when man stopped doing work and horses started doing the work for the humans. But humans always made the decisions, right? The horse didn't decide when to plow the field; the human being did. And then we went to machines. And the horses, we started betting on them, eating them, and petting them, right? And we started using machines, but humans still made the decisions. We've reached the point now when the machines can make decisions, and that's the origin of this new revolution I think we're at the beginning of. And that's when I'm going to talk about one aspect of it. Okay, so this is why this revolution is occurring. It occurs in cars. It occurs in lots of different machines nowadays. What happens when you make a decision, and you do it, whether you're driving a car or deciding, should you send the runner from first base? Okay. Should you waste your time cheering for the Cubs or going with the surefire Yankees? Okay. There's decision, right? You make decisions. When you make a decision, you first observe, right? You capture content. You look. You're driving your car. You're saying, okay, is the car in front of me going too slow or not? And then you orient, you take in all this different information, and then you decide what the information means. And based on that, You decide what you're going to do, and then you actually do it. You act, right? So when you think about this, right, with I got a call from the school. My son was in kindergarten because he cut his hat because he was leaning back in his chair too far during a movie they were watching, and I had to take him to the emergency room, right? A lot of decisions to make. But I had the core content. I had the content that my kid had to go to the hospital for the 18th time for doing something stupid. But all along the way, right, you're making decisions. Okay, did you stop? Yeah, there's no bleeding. He's fine. He's coherent, right? So you get him to the hospital, you say, okay, any head injury, anything. And you continually get content and you make decisions based on the interpretation. Now, high-frequency trading systems, the systems you've been hearing about, the robo-advisors and things, when those things trade stocks, they'll make 1 million decisions a second. But they're doing the same thing. They get information about the market, they interpret what it means, they decide to buy or sell, and they do it. They'll do that 1 million times a second. A car, the driverless cars you see on the road, actually the cars, if you're driving newer cars, your cars have about 300 computers in them, several hundred lines of code, several 100 million lines of code. Your cars are making decisions for you several thousand times a second. Emergency rooms, making decisions, on the time scale of seconds to minutes. Supply chain planners, years, right? You're thinking about years ahead of time. So the time scale of these decisions are also important, but you're doing the same thing over and over again. This is how the artificial intelligence works in your cars and in drones and things. What they don't do well, but they're starting to do better, is this whole orient piece. What does it mean? What does the content mean? And we'll get to that in a second. Okay? So here are some things you may or may not realize are automated. The Google car parse, the robots on the left side making cars. John Deere and Caterpillar now, a lot of their equipment is automated. They don't need drivers. In fact, the Caterpillar trucks at the Rio Tinto mines in Western Australia have no drivers. And in fact, the mines have no workers. You have automated mines working, dumping stuff into these trucks, which take them to a train. They dump them into a train which has no engineer. The train goes about 1,800 miles to the port. So that whole front end of a supply chain, just getting raw materials from a mine, has become highly automated. Drones in the top, high frequency trading here. You're hearing more and more about it. If you're going for robo-advisor kinds of stuff, all right, more and more, those are the things that are going to do trades for you. Now the one in the middle is called Game Changer, which some of you, do any of you use Game Changer to follow your kid or grandkids? Okay. So my son played high school baseball, and thank God he's still playing in college. I can't give it up just yet. So I was staying with a friend of mine whose son played on the other team, and we were watching the game. When the game was over, we both had a Game Changer. And when the game was over, we got a news article from Game Changer. And the one I got said, Cary Grove defeats Barrington in close game. Okay, and it talks about my son's Cary Grove High School baseball team. And my son's name was mentioned and so on. His article was titled, Barrington loses close one to Cary Grove, and all the content is about the Barrington team. Well, Game Changer has an artificial intelligence program which actually writes the articles. And based on your subscription, will tailor the article to what you want to. You don't care about Cary Grove baseball, you care about Barrington baseball, right? So that's what the article's about. It's artificial intelligence taking facts, because it has all the facts of a baseball team, and writing the article. And it's a really good article. They've started adding flavor to it, it's not bad. So these are examples of drones in our lives today, things that artificial intelligence runs, And you may or may not realize it, but it's become quite prevalent. So now we want to talk about cars and self-driving cars. And really where our future is going is more transportation as a service. You're going to own fewer and fewer cars. Your children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren probably will not own a car. They will simply whip out the supercomputer. This, by the way, is more powerful than the supercomputers I use in grad school. It's a little sad. But they'll whip this out and and they'll find their car that they want, and the car will come and pick them up. Even more so, I think what will happen is any of us going from point A to point B it's more of a service. We won't own the means to the service, we'll just request it, and it'll come and pick us up. Very much like Uber, right? We're all getting comfortable with Uber, right? It just goes, it snowballs from there. More and more of that way. So think about this scenario, right? Suppose you commute to work, right? Every morning you walk outside, there's an electric car sitting there for you to get in. You get in, it takes you to wherever you're going, drops you off. And then when you're done, you walk outside and there's another car, probably another electric car, will pick you up and take you home. Okay? And on the weekend, if you decide you got to, mulch the yard, Saturday morning when you wake up, there's a pickup truck in your driveway ready to take you to get the mulch. Okay? And maybe you're paying $149 a month to your local car dealership for that privilege. Okay? You have no insurance, you don't own anything, you have no loans. You're paying a monthly fee to be able to have cars kind of on demand on a regular schedule. And then you can use an app if you have some sort of ad hoc demand. Send me an ambulance, my stupid kid just fell over again, and I think. So that's where I think we're headed. That's sort of the punchline. So in the driverless cars, you've heard a lot about them, right? So kind of how do they work? Well, the big thing to realize is, and this is just a generic picture, but basically cars have sensors on them. Think cameras that can take pictures at different kinds of wavelengths, like infrared or radio wavelengths or X-ray or things like that. And what they do is they're constantly capturing data all the time. Okay? The big thing you hear about is LiDAR, right, which is basically a laser directional radar. So what happens with a LiDAR, it shoots out beams of light on bundles, and then the reflection back allows it to map out what's in front of it. LiDAR used to be a really, really expensive technology. The military used to use it at the beginning of the Iraq War to map out terrains. And those things are really, really expensive. Today, I mean, it's amazing how these technologies have gone from millions of dollars a sensor down to a few $100s or less. That just shows you how useful they are and how important they are and where investments are going. So what happens is all these different kinds of cameras have different functions. You know, one will help you with park assisting, right? It senses your immediate surroundings and helps your car. Right now, some of you probably have a car that parks itself, right? This is those cameras on your car are using that to position, find out where everything is so it can back in. And you can see how well, but it's a set of cameras continually feeding data to the computers on your car, which then figure out how much to turn the wheels and how fast to go and what angle and so on. And it's making those decisions thousands of times a second. Okay. Other ones are looking at your surrounding environment. Right? Are there cars to the left or to the right of you? Is there obstructions in front? Is there something coming up from you from behind? Right? It's trying to figure out what's in your immediate environment. Other sensors are what's in your global environment. Are you downtown Chicago or are you in the wheat fields of Kansas? Right? It's trying to figure out the global picture. There's specific sensors for detecting Are you in a traffic, if you're in a traffic situation, traffic lights, okay, or specific signs, okay? So all these different sensors by different colors and different directions here, there's many kinds performing very specific tasks or more general tasks. They all take data, they send them to computers on your car, they get interpreted, analytics, i.e. information is created that is fed to artificial intelligence systems, which then based on information will take action. Now the key thing here is these artificial intelligence systems, as they continually get more and more data, they refine their decisions. They're not conscious, okay? There's no Terminators in our futures, okay? They're just computer programs which are continually changing how they compute an outcome and act on that outcome. So here's a really fancy looking, this is a picture I show my students what's called a neural network. Okay, I won't explain it to you, but this is a kind of a neural network. Basically what happens is that it gets data from the left, which are sensors. All the sensors you're seeing on in that previous slide, all those sensors are sending data to neural networks that process them using the blue, and the output's the red. And the red says, turn the wheel slightly more to the left. Okay, that could be an outcome. But it goes through that several thousand times a second. Okay? And the blues change what their output is. They make a calculation, they send the output to some more blues, and through all this calculation gets done, kind of like how your neurons work in your brain, right? You get an output. Turn the wheel, turn the wheel, turn the wheel, turn the wheel. Apply the brakes. Okay, that's the output. So how will it work? I really think that, so when your grandchildren, let's see, they've got a blended audience here, we be careful. Those of you who have kids who are, say, 2 or 3 or 4 years old, when you bring them to Notre Dame for their freshman year, chances are it'll be in a driverless car. It may be an Expedition or something, but it'll be a big car, but it'll probably be driverless. For 80% of your trip, say. The last mile along the streets and things, it may not be, but chances are it will be. When if your kids are 2 and 3 years old, your grandchildren will absolutely be coming here in a car you probably won't recognize. I'll get to that in a second. So actually I can talk about it now. So think about this for a second. If you had one of the regular phones, right, would you take that phone and try to do this with it? Like try to put buttons on it or a screen on that phone to try to do this stuff? Right? Would you try to change what the handle looks like? And with how the cord, on the regular phone, right? The old phone that, most of us grew up with, not all of you, but most of us grew up with this old phone, right? And it has a handle to it, and it's attached by this wiring cord to a device. Would you try to replicate this functions in that kind of a phone? Now we say, yeah, it's ridiculous, right? Well, why would we want to replicate a driverless car, self-driving car, using that design? Does that make sense? I think the answer is no. I think the cars in 15 years that are truly driverless won't look like that. They will look different. I don't know how different, but there's some startups today that are making driverless cars from the beginning to be fully self-driving, and there's no steering wheel, there's no real dashboard, right? You're just sitting in it. And so the idea is, and by the way, this is where Google and Apple and others are going. They want to own that user experience in that car. I don't think they want to build the car. I think they're crazy if they think they want to build a car for you. They want to own that. You sit down and in that car, they want you talking to Siri or Alexa. They don't care about the car. They care about charging you money to talk to Siri and do all kinds of stuff. Let Siri do everything you need. That's what they want. All right? And I don't think that's the car for it. So I think companies that are trying to retrofit these things over time, sure, makes sense. But I think in the future, it just doesn't make sense that this is how a self-driverless car is going to look like. Okay? Now, there's some good and bad and ugly to all this. The good, well, we can go from 100 deaths a day down to 10 with self-driving cars. An order of magnitude change in the number of deaths. I mean, that to me is the holy grail. This is the reason we're doing it. The sooner we do it, the better off we're going to be. Now, those 10 deaths might be a little difficult to stomach because they may be really different from the kinds of ways that people are killed on the roads today. Just because it's self-driving cars getting into accidents that make no sense. That's because of the software. I'll talk about that in a second. And the number of injuries will go from 2.5 million down to 100,000 a year. Sorry, I'm blending units there, I apologize. 2.5 million people don't get hurt per day on their roads. But you can see how with the estimated decrease in number of injuries are. So this is huge, but it does have a downside. What happens to GM? I think GM needs to, I'll get to that in a second. I think GM needs to shed its car business, get out of the car business and think about other stuff, and I'll get to that in a second. Otherwise, it's going to be like Kodak. Right now, the conversations that GM is having about self-driving cars resemble the conversations the Kodak executives had in the mid-'80s when the digital camera was coming out. We all know how that left. I think GM is in the same spot, but they do have a chance, I think. But I think also the number of jobs will decrease. I'll get to that in a second. But the problem with this is, let me talk about it now. So what the problem with with GM, think about your car, right? Right now, all our cars are sitting in parking lots, right? Waiting for us to come get them. 80% of the time, your car sits there and does absolutely nothing. When we go to this new world where we only drive a car when we need it, it drops you off at work, it goes off and does something else. It goes and picks up groceries for somebody and takes it to their house. It goes drive somebody to the airport. The cars in the future will be used 80 to 90% of the time, which means that there will be fewer cars needed in the future. One estimate says we build, I think, about 4 million cars a year. In the future, maybe 500,000 cars a year, maybe. But they won't be the cars that GM has on the design board right now, or Ford or others. So GM, its assembly plants, as I'll argue in a minute, are probably, if you look at their capacity to build cars, that capacity is not going to be needed in 10 to 15 years. The number of jobs should go down tremendously. The number of people in there's about 2 million people, I think, in the automotive supply chain, 2 to 3 million. That'll go down to a few 100,000. So this is a gut-wrenching thing. The ugly. Almost 20% of organs for transplants come from deaths on traffic accidents. There's still people dying because they don't get a transplant organ. So now the supply is going to be reduced for good reasons. What happened? Well, we better hope that the startups thinking about printing organs or growing them in pigs, which you're trying to do, they need to ramp that up. That needs to be in full production in about 15 years. Because you're going to start losing organs. Hackers. Your cars will be hacked into. You will find that you can't start your car unless you pay a hacker $1,000. Your cars are as complex software as just about anything out there. They are getting better from a security perspective, but your cars will be hacked. All right? I grew up in New Jersey in a really tough neighborhoods, and a lot of my friends are in jail and been in jail or dead because of illegal activities, right? I can see some of them thinking, great, now I know I can control my crews, right? I can just hack into cars, I don't like them, I'll do something to them, right? You have pathological killers thinking about how to use this stuff. So, yes, it will be a problem. Bless you. Another thing that I don't think people appreciate very well is when we go to automated operations, think about your businesses. One of the reasons you put robots in and automate is you get better information about what's going on in your business, right? You get better information, better analytics, you know what your sales are, what your production is, you match the two together. All this information from automation helps you out. Once you start automating our lives, governments find that they benefit from it. It's not just the NSA can track you, but I guarantee you, I know for a fact that governments haven't thought of this yet, but they will. There are ways for governments to extract more revenues out of us because they can track us better. What kind of cars we're using, they can reduce the speed of cars on the highways to accommodate various environmental things. If they say, you know what, our carbon footprint's too big, we're going to ratchet down the speed limit on I-90 into Chicago by 5 miles an hour for the next 3 months. And you have no choice. They send out the commands to the cars follow it. Okay? So the government will be getting more information about our activities and be able to control. Now, maybe a good or bad thing, but it's a thing. So, getting back to the, I want to talk a bit about ethics. Okay? So a while back, the Google car was going around Mountain, this is a true story, going around Mountain View, you know, there was a guy in the front seat, you know, taking data, watching it, but the car was operating on its own. Comes around a corner, encounters an old lady in a wheelchair with a broom in her hand, there was electric wheelchair, she was going full speed down the street with a broom chasing a duck. Okay. Google hires really, really smart people, but none of them thought to test for that scenario. Okay. Yeah, why? Yeah, right, why? So the car, it encountered something it couldn't analyze. It said, I can't, the ability for it to classify that didn't exist. It defaulted to stop the car. So the car stopped. Now think about if something like this happens at 70 miles an hour. These are kind of adverse situations which always occur. And those sort of adverse situations occur at high speeds, low speeds, and everywhere, right? So the question is, could that car suddenly decide, you know what, that's another car, I'm going to pass it. Okay, and then it runs over the woman and it kills the duck. So the problem with this too, the ugly piece is around ethics. Car companies have decided that when the car is largely operational, self-operational, it will, when it encounters a situation, it will do what it can to protect the occupants of the car, even if that means running over and killing other people. Now, that's a hard comment, but that's the implication. It will do what it takes to protect the people in the car. All right? And that's how accidents will start to happen, that we start to ratchet down the number of people killed, the number who are, when they survive, actually ones who do get killed in this new world, it'll probably happen in weird ways that we will find really uncomfortable and won't like. And then we want our government to do something about it. And of course, they'll do something about it and they'll make the situation worse. All right? So ethics is a big piece of this. This is something I really do worry about a lot. We're just going to spin up a conference kind of on this in the fall and just start to think through these things. And there's a lot of thought going through them. Winners. Okay. Does anybody own a car dealership? Got a winner. Car dealerships are the winners, I think. Okay, Carone speaking. They got to make sure, though, they get 3D printing. Because the manufacturer of cars, I think, will get pushed out to the dealerships. With 3D print, I don't know if you realize, a lot of our military now, a lot of that stuff is getting printed 3D. Right? It's called additive manufacturing. So, if car company, and this is the place I go, there's actually a Ford dealership. This was taken about 300 years ago when they were still a Chevy dealership, but now they're a Ford dealership. But dealerships will have the ability to print car parts and assemble car, almost on demand. It won't take that long. There's a Chinese company that 2 years ago used refuge to print a 12,000 square foot house. They left holes for conduit and piping and windows. We wouldn't live in it, but it was a house, 12,000 square foot house. Parts of our jet aircraft, fighter aircraft are made by printing. Printing cars is not going to be difficult. So pushing out the manufacturing to what we call the edge, to the dealerships, that's where I think the winners are. They're the ones who can print the cars that you're going to want on demand. They're the ones that are going to be getting $179 a month from you. Losers, besides the New York Mets. GM, I think GM, if they sell off their car business over the next 10, 15 years, and they have a lot of good other businesses. EDS can get into the business of supporting dealerships in this new picture. They do a lot of niche vehicles for the military. They do a lot of other things. If they did what Ericsson did and simply recreated their business, they would, I think, and rebranded themselves, got rid of the GM and went to something else, right? That's some other kind of brand like Google did. I think they stand a chance of reinventing and being a powerhouse in the future. I really do. I just think when you go to a service-oriented business like transportation, everything gets commoditized. Why do you want to be in that business? Tier 1, Tier 2 supply, Tier 1, 2, 3 suppliers, all those suppliers in the supply chain, they got the same problem. They need to think about what they're going to do. They can't live forever in the automotive world. The other one are unions. Unions are going to, their membership are going to lose jobs. Millions of jobs are going to get displaced. Now, new jobs will come on, right? I mean, how many of you, if you look at this thing, right, 7, 10 years ago, the jobs that exist today were not even thought of 10 years ago because of this, right? So when these new cars come online, right, there's going to be new kinds of jobs we haven't even thought of. The problem is those kinds of jobs are difficult to put into a union. Unions are created, right, because you get a large number of people with a shared agenda, shared need, right? That doesn't really exist. That's going away. Now, there's some ideas I have had around unions about how they can redo themselves, but I think the unions are the ones who are in the biggest trouble because their current business model is 100 and some years old. They got to do something. And it's not business as usual for them. All right, so here's a really weird one. One of my students in my graduate class, he absolutely refused to let me talk about this. He literally shouted me down. Okay? He just refused. He said, it'll never, never, never happen. I said, dude, if it can happen, it will. Don't ever say never in the field of technology. So, what I was trying to talk about in the class is these driverless cars, trucks, robots and things, they really don't need human owners. Take a driverless car, self-driving car. It can pick you up. You can summon with an app, tell it where to go. You can pay using PayPal or one of the other ones, right? Every function that thing needs, it doesn't require a human. So why does it need a human owner? It doesn't. Now you may say, oh, wait a minute, how do you go from, what's the series of steps that results in a car owning itself, right? Because there's legal and financial, and so on, right? I get that. But it can happen, right? There's no reason it can't happen, so in my mind it's gonna happen. It doesn't mean the car's a person. It just means it's a legal entity. It owns itself. It can pay taxes, you can file online, right? It can send its information to an accountant. When it needs gas, it can pull into a place and have somebody put gas in the car for it. It can negotiate with mechanic shops to have work done, right? Back and forth, message back and forth. There's nothing that these things need that you have to have human intervention. So at some point, we will be faced with the fact that these cars are their own LLC, effectively. And what does that mean? Well, I think it makes politicians just thrilled to death because they can now tax something that can't vote. Okay? So think about this for a second, right? A car makes, let's say it makes $1 million a year, and its operating expenses to continue, let's just say $100,000. Well, the government can now take $900,000. And what's the car going to do? It's just a machine, right? It's just a computer. It can't protest. It can't vote. So I think that this may also be a vehicle to fund public projects and governments in the future. So that's my weird idea. I don't think it's very weird, but my one student got so upset and lathered up about it, I just was like, okay. So take your meds and we'll talk later. Now, one last thing too, to talk about is logistics as a service. Is anybody here kind of in the logistics business of UPS, FedEx, delivery stuff, part of your business? Okay. They have these driverless trucks now, which have a value going point to point. From Chicago to using interstates to Denver. Makes sense. Okay? Trucks negotiating downtown Chicago, I don't think that's a sweet spot here for these things. But effectively, they just become trains. Right? It's just another kind of a train. The other one, though, which I think is far more compelling, are drones that can carry loads similar to what trucks can carry. That, I think, is where they're using. In fact, this is where I'd be pointing GM. If they had the weirdness to want to listen to me at any point, I would say, you know what? This is where your investments money should go. Think about long-haul drones. Okay? The big thing here is that they're not restricted to roads. They can go from point B to point A to point B, however they want to go, right? They don't have to be a certain width. They don't have to be a certain height to fit underneath overpasses, right? The urban legend about the reason our car lanes are the width they are is because of Roman horses, Roman chariots. Has everyone heard that one? You've all heard that, right? That's sort of true, but it dictates the size of everything. Now it doesn't. So suddenly, when you can pick up a load at a port, right, the load doesn't have to be in a container load, it's a convenient size. But it can be taken from point A to point B, and point B can be anywhere. Doesn't need to be by a large city, doesn't need to be near, interstates, things like that. This, I think, is far more important to us. And this is an engineering problem. This is not a research problem. This is still sort of a research problem. They still have stuff they haven't quite figured out. This is a lot easier. So with that, I'm going to stop and take some questions. I think that as far as self-driving cars, trains left the station, it's in your future, get over it. Doesn't mean you can't drive cars. That'll always be the case. But I think that, the companies you work for, you need to sit down and start thinking long-term how transportation logistics as a service is going to impact you. And with some scenarios like that, think about how it's going to influence your investment decisions, things like that. I know I'll get this question, so I answer right now. If I had $1 billion, what do I do with it? I'd invest it in the long haul, the freight drones myself. So, with that, thank you very much for coming, and I'll be taking more help to take some questions. Yes.
So two things. One is, what do you think is going to happen in the future of like commuter rail? Like I take commuter rail in
Sure.
Chicago. And then secondarily, in terms of the winners, could like people who do fancy artificial intelligence programming or whatever, is that a winning
Sure. I think that,
job or whatever?
yeah. Google has just come, let me answer the second one first. Google has just come out with a way for programmers to use artificial intelligence capabilities, their DeepMind, the product's called TensorFlow, that the ability to access data and artificial intelligence as part of a program has not just gotten incredibly easy. So if you talk to some VCs in California, basically their attitude is every startup, the next 10,000 startups will all have AI incorporated into it in some fashion. So, and I've lived through a couple of what we call AI winters where we thought we had AI right and it crashed and burned. Thought we had it right, crashed and burned. I think we got it right now. And then the first one is, remind me again, I'm sorry.
Commuter rails.
Commuter rail. Yeah, political problems there. I think that if the value proposition, getting your car and getting downtown, and if the cost of doing that is comparable to Metra, because I've taken Metra,
Yeah.
and it's great. But you're right. If the time scale changes and the cost changes, I think it's out of business. Yeah.
I know you picked on GM a little bit, but what do you think is going to happen with the other big OEMs? Do you think they're facing the same position? Or?
Same thing. I think Ford is a little bit better positioned. I just don't. I can't understand why you want to build these cars. There's going to be too few of them to build, I think. There is, but they're positioned to last the longest in some fashion. They're much more nimble than GM is. So is BMW and others. The OEMs, if they got a lot of them do have a broad base, industrial base, so if they lose the car business, they might be able to pick it up somewhere else. They may get into more intelligent sensors, building things that have artificial intelligence in them, and market those. That would be a good thing for that.
You mentioned labor unions being one of the losers among these. Now, does that refer specifically to automotive-related labor unions, or do you think there could be some kind of domino effect where it affects other sectors of the economy?
Well, certainly the automotive unions, without doubt. The public sector ones, you can automate government to 80% level if we had the fortitude to do it. I think you know, my cousins, New Jersey, are in plumbers unions, trades unions. It's difficult, though, I think, while the pipes themselves might be printed, putting them together in a beer factory, right? So a couple of them worked at the Anheuser-Busch factory next to Newark Airport. And they were there like 10 years, but it was like industrial plumbing. I don't know how you replace those kinds of humans. I don't think there's not a value proposition to create a robot to do the same thing. Kind of, there may be, but there's such intricacy sometimes with it. So that, I think, would be more, they would be more protected just because the more dexterity required, the more difficult it is to automate it, right, in the process. I think, you know, my wife's a flight attendant for American Airlines for 30-some years. You know, she and the pilots are going away. I think those unions are, you know, mechanics unions are going to have trouble too because all the parts for planes will get printed and easily interchanged in and out. It's difficult. So, I mean, our government is going to make this heroic attempt to save jobs, right, and force airlines to use humans and not, you know, they're going to force us to, but at some point it just stops, right? It's just. So I think you'll see this as automation takes over and things, that you'll start to see workers having to be repurposed. There's nothing that says an American Airlines mechanic can't learn a new trade. We have coal miners learning to program, right? They have a program, they have a thing set up in West Virginia. You got these new companies springing up in coal mine country in West Virginia. These guys are doing web development work. Fine, great. That's the sort of thing that has to happen to airline mechanics and things, and it's not going to be easy.
So if what you're saying is that, like, we would have these cars that would be running all day long, performing various services for a lot of different people. So like, say I call a car to take me to work, and then that same car goes and takes somebody else to the grocery store. So all these different people that we don't even know will be getting in and out of these cars. I mean, that's kind of a strange, that's going to be kind of a strange sensation, because our car is sort of a personal space right now. Do you see what I mean? And then all of a sudden, it'll be more like a cab, I guess, or an Uber.
But when you use Uber, do you care about who's been in it before?
Well, but there's somebody there making sure that it's okay when I.
Well, there's the new business, right? You know, there's some new, you guarantee when you get in that driverless car, it's, you know, I don't know. I agree with it, right? I mean, you know, there's been, you know, when I was in college, I'd come home to my room in the fraternity house, and my roommate, I was always a little afraid to walk in and see what you know, disaster awaited me after a night of partying. It was, same thing, yeah, I know. I don't know, I think that, you know, the younger generation is just not gonna have those
Probably not.
you know?
When they offer an analogy, you know, 1910, 1920s, people just petting their horses when they got cars, but they got used to it.
They got used to it, yeah. The custom whip people, you know, they got over that too.
How about factors that I would call personality and attitude? Some people want to go as fast as hell, no matter whether they have to or not. Some people like to sit back and relax. Will those factors, do you think, be available in the future, or is everybody going to be forced to fit the same mold?
Everyone's going to be more or less forced to fit in the same mold. Now, so when I actually, when I teach here at Notre Dame, I actually commute from Northwest Illinois. I live up just north of Barrington. So when I drive, it's about a 3-hour drive. Wherever driving the I-90 down to 294, okay, I'm in the right-hand lane going 70 miles an hour in a 55-mile-an-hour zone, and I'm the slowest person there. But it's the same thing in New Jersey, right? I go to Turnpike, New Jersey, to go visit my mom on the Jersey Shore. Right-hand lane of Turnpike or Parkway, 70 miles an hour, and people are flying past me. I think that kind of behavior will be eliminated, that we will be forced, the cars themselves will decide how fast to go. They will communicate with one another, there will be regulatory restrictions on them, and they will take you where you want to go. If you're driving your own car, you will stick out like a sore thumb doing this, okay? And some people do this just to see the driverless cars, you know, have to avoid them, right? Think about that, right? I know some guys will get out there like, oh, there I come, the driverless car, I got you, right? Okay. So, or, you know, think about, you know, you're driving home through Chicago, right? And suddenly some guy jumps out in front of your car, well, your car stops, oh, I don't want to run him over, but he doesn't move. And every time the car goes around him, he goes like this. You know, he pretends to be hurt or whatever. Okay, and the car won't, what's the car gonna do? You know, I think that's a dangerous predicament to be in. I think this whole transition is gonna be really difficult for us. And I think that it's difficult to predict what will happen, obviously. But I think that kind of dynamic is in our future and how our regulatory bodies deal with it. Not that I think they have the ability to deal with it. I think it's going to be it could result in those sort of accidents which make you scratch your head and say, well, why did that happen?
Who do you think will run the fleets, and what is the risk of, since it seems to me that should tend to become, you know, as you go larger, you're more efficient, so it tends to become a national monopoly. What's the risk that the government will say, we'll run this?
I think it's a huge risk. You know, a long time ago, no one thought healthcare was a fundamental right. Right? Now more people think healthcare is a fundamental right. You go to transportation as a service, I think people are going to say, well, transportation is a fundamental right. And what's going to happen? Well, the government's probably going to take it over, right? I think that's when I would, you know, personally myself, I would, you know, join a rebel band at that point. I think it was, to me, that's so much control, I wouldn't be able to stomach it. But I think that is a very possible outcome. You know, the other idea, though, is, you know, having the car dealerships own the cars. Right, they can actually own it. They have that product. You don't have insurance or anything. You're just paying a fee, right, like Uber. But it may be that the cars all own themselves, and the governments just prefer to tax them at 90% tax rate kind of thing. It's hard to tell.
But isn't that the equivalent of the government owning it?
Yeah,
Right, regulations
pretty much.
how they operate, and they take
Yeah.
the profit?
Yeah, you're right. You're right.
You mentioned the other day, you kind of you're saying that dealers, you think, will become kind of the winners?
Well, I think of existing kind of legal entities, I think the dealers have our highest probability of being successful in this new world.
I feel like Tesla is kind of already showing people that the dealer could be completely taken out of the equation, especially when these cars drive themselves. You can see GM being one. Will build you your car as you order online, drives itself to your house. There's really no need.
But you still have to have dealerships if something goes wrong. I mean, how does GM manage a fleet?
GM on a smaller.
Yeah.
They're not building as many cars they could be
Right.
maintaining and.
But I think that the ability to rapidly manufacture cars that you need, color, you know, interior customizations, things like that. I think you'll find that being able to have a car that, you know, for your son or daughter's wedding, that you can design, that's a designer kind of car. I think the motivation for that would be kind of huge. And if the cost of doing that is $2,000 for a limo, that, you know, it's customed, but that'd be done at the dealership, right? The dealership prints that. You're right. I mean, that's definitely an outcome as well. I think that the dealerships could be very disruptive in this thing if they started taking over manufacturing at that level. It's my opinion, but you're absolutely, great point, great point.
What do you think happens with infrastructure like garages and parking lots?
Well, I think they still get used. I think that, you know, cars still have to get repaired, right? parking becomes a lot easier, because if the cars have to park, they can, they can go to, you can find these, some of our open land now become a lot easier to repurpose as parking lots, right? Because they just pull in, they sit there, and then when they have to leave, they leave. Kind of like a cell phone parking lot at an airport. I think, they're still needed, right?
But just volume wise, if you're,
Yeah.
the number of cars you need is gonna go down by a factor of 10 or, 10 or 20, so you need, you need 10 or.
Well, areas like Chicago probably, because sometimes cars will want to sit there and wait. Maybe it makes sense for them to sit and wait for an hour versus doing anything else. So you go to a parking garage, you sit there for an hour, you pay for an hour, and then you leave. I don't think that goes away.
Electric cars have been around for a decade or so, but the market penetration, market share is still very low. You keep citing this 10 to 15-year timeline. What's driving that?
And just the technological progress, and the fact that it's just, people want to be first movers in this whole thing. The electric cars, like Tesla says, can be, viable. Economically, I still struggle with the economics of electric cars. I would never get one, just because I think they're too expensive in the long run. I'm also not convinced that they help the environment, personally, because you look at the entire process of going from beginning to end for an electric car, it damages the environment. And, I really struggle with that, but I'm not an expert by all means on any of that. I think as we go forward, I think the regulatory and the political will is focused on all of us being electric cars. I think natural gas is a better option, but I think we're going to be almost forced to use them. Like California passed a law, right, about a certain number of cars per by a certain date had to be 70%, some percentage of electric cars in California. I think they'll continue to ratchet that up. I think the energy, bad pun, but the energy around forcing us to accept things like electric cars and reducing our carbon footprints and things are too much for some regulatory bodies to ignore, and they want us to live a certain way. That's why they're pushing everybody into urban environments and things. Maybe the right thing to do, I just struggle with it. I think electric cars are the same way. The economics don't make sense to me, but
just two other areas you did kind of touch on as maybe losers or impacted by this is one is certainly the car insurance industry. It's going to have major ramifications from this. And the other, I'd like to know what your thoughts about even as far as like DMVs, even need for a driver's license.
right. So on the first one, there's I had some insurance clients before. The joke is, well, you probably sell one car insurance policy to GM. Which agent gets that commission? Yeah, I think the Allstates, Progressives of the world, I think they're, I used to work at Allstate, and this is one of the things I brought up, and to say I got my head handed to me was putting it mildly, right? Because of course, we'll always be car insurance. I think that's a problem, so I agree with you. Driver's license, I don't think your grandchildren will probably have driver's license. I don't think your great-grandchildren will. You might get. I think the children of the millennials' grandchildren will not have driver's licenses. They'll have another form of identification.
Isn't there's a larger implication, this is just one application of technology to a particular area, but automation is going to substitute human labor, right?
Oh, yeah.
It's not just a matter of disruption, of finding those people new jobs, right? Have you
Right.
thought about what are the long-term implications for our lack of need of human labor?
You know, I worry a lot about it. I think a lot about it, especially from a Catholic perspective. Right now, I'm writing an article called "Siri, Should I Believe in God?" Because you think about people asking questions to Siri, right? you know, Siri, should I, you know, show me directions, what's my government appointment, what's this, what's that, right? We all know how hard our students work at school, right? I'm gonna go out on a thick branch here and say at some point, our grandchildren are gonna say, Siri, remind me again what Plato meant in his book on ethics. I don't wanna read it, tell me, give me the Cliff Notes version, I can write this essay for me, Siri, on, Aristotle's Poetics associated with Macbeth. Can you write a quick one-pager for me? That's in our future. And I think that that kind of an interaction makes it really difficult for the, and maybe just focus on the Catholic Church, because this is where I've been doing a lot of my thinking, really Christian religion. Do you think Apple is going to going to allow Siri to give responses back to that question, should I believe with God, that are consistent with the teachings of the Catholic Church? I'm gonna say no. Okay? Now you may say something different. I'm gonna say no. In fact, if you use Siri in a public school, will they allow it to give you that kind of an answer? Probably not. I think when it comes to this whole automation piece, the church has to, I think, internalize the fact that this is not just another new technology. This whole automation piece is very disruptive to the entire society. And that unless we can ensure that, you know, the mission of Notre Dame, for example, and our Catholic teachings and the catechism and things are maintained, when more and more of our citizens turn to these devices or are may have more time in their hands and not know what to do with it, that I think our lives it's going to become a real struggle and a really difficult problem for things like the Catholic Church to figure out what to do. I think that, so I struggle, I think about it a lot, obviously. I think that it's just not just a new technology. I think there has to be some very kind of radical thinking in how we manage the content in our society as a church.
That was my question. The technology is easy and fun. Are the departments of theology and philosophy keeping up?
Well, you know, right before, you know, we were getting ready to walk out for the graduation 2 weeks ago, and the Secret Service had us in this little holding pen. And I was talking to a professor from, I'm not sure what the department was, but he does a lot about social justice. I asked him, I said, do you worry about this topic at all? He goes, no, never heard of it, not on my radar screen, don't know what you're talking about. I was like, all right, dude, I think, you know, I can see a blind side coming when I can, you know, I think, and I'm trying to engage them, and I think to talk to them about, they need to worry about this sort of thing, because whether they like it or not, Siri is just a computer program. But people are going to get content from them and depend on them for advice, even though it's a computer program, right? So, and that's where you can't say, wait a minute, I'm a human, that's just Siri, you can't listen to that, listen to me. What do your kids do today when they're on the phone? Do they listen to you today when they're on the phone? No. They're going to, you know, so yeah.
Short answer is no.
It's hard, I'm sorry.
No,
I'm passionate about this stuff.
Yeah, it's,
I'm just gonna say, some people drive not as a means to an end because they like to drive, like
Right.
people still drive stick shift. What happens, will all cars be automated, or
I
there's
think,
still gonna be a market for
yeah.
human-driven cars?
I think it slowly, the human-driven car doesn't go away, just slowly, it'll have a long tail for it. There's no question. You know, who wants to watch it? If you like stock car races, who wants to watch Driverless Cars? They don't get into fights after the race is over, so what's the fun in
I
it?
want to see the remake of Bullet when they do the.
Yeah, or Smoking the Bandit.
What are your thoughts on this when it comes to large farms, large ranches where you have crops or cattle that have to be moved from point A to point B. You've got all these machinations that have to do with ranching. How will this affect that?
Well, I mean, our farming population is down to about 2% of the population, I think. I think it goes to 0.0001%. You know, right now, they have machines that can milk cows. Larger dairy operations have automated cows walk in, the machine milks them, the cows walk out.
No, I'm talking about big cattle ranches, meat.
Well, the cattle ranches, I think that, you know, they have drones right now taking care of cattle, herding them. The big, you know, right now, you know, automating the large farms, like, you know, the farms in Illinois, like Indiana and stuff. My old, you know, and his son goes to Rose Holman Institute of Technology in Terre Haute. And after a while, you're just driving through cornfield after cornfield going down there. All those can be handled by automated systems. Humans don't need to be on these farms.
Most of them are automatic tractors.
Yeah, tractors, but even the decisions, the machines can decide what to plant, how much to plant. And it'd be interesting, I think, is gonna watch what decisions they make. Because they may make decisions that we're not, that just sort of shock us on what they decide to plant. So it was another,
One thing, let's look at nuclear power and what that was 25 years ago and what it is today. Airplanes. You know, we've taken an airplane, it's like going on a Greyhound bus was 30 years ago.
sure.
And yet, and so now we've got people that will own a $25 million airplane to commute to Florida. Mark Peebles, who was just let go at Ford Motor Company, was home in Florida. And he was not willing to move to Detroit. He had a private plane fly him from his home in Florida to Detroit every Sunday night and fly him back Thursday night, every week.
Nice job if you can get it.
I mean, so there'll always be alternatives
Sure,
for people that can afford the alternative,
no question about it.
and they will have new alternatives.
Yeah,
Almost
I think,
everything.
yeah.
And you're right about nitrogen.
Yeah, liquid, yeah.
And the batteries, when the batteries on these cars fail, it's gonna be a nightmare, just like it is with nuclear.
Right, I mean, the disposal of batteries is not a good thing right now. That's one of the big problems I have with it. Nuclear power could be very, very viable. I just think
Yeah.
culturally, we're not there yet, but natural gas, definitely. Okay, I guess the last question, because we're running over.
Have you looked into the possibility of passenger drones
Replacing the,
the cars?
yeah, there's yeah, I mean, I didn't get into that, it's a whole separate talk I have, but basically, yeah, drone, you know, getting into a drone and flying downtown Chicago, I imagine at some point that'll be an option for us. I think there's still some work to be done there, more research versus engineering. Okay, thank you again very much.